Okay, so the official David's version of the 4PP documentary. A couple people asked in the last video, left some comments. It's something I've always been open to doing. Um, I think, sometimes you try to make too you have too high of expectations, and sometimes getting the story out there is better than having the end all be all greatest video of it. So, I'm just gonna record it. I hit record. Let's go. Um, the origins to the 4PP story. Uh, well, I'm myself. I've known myself my whole life, so that's me. That's how I met me. And then, so there's, who do I go first? Okay, I'll go with Travis first. So Travis was a funny situation because I lived in Austin, and I was in school, and then I kind of quit school to go work at GameStop because, well, I just needed a job, so I went to GameStop, and I like video games, and I was working there and working there, and through working at GameStop, that's kind of how I met a lot of people because there's people with like interests, and similar life paths would come in, and you talk to them, and I remember Travis was just this regular kid that would come into our store, and he was like, you could tell he was a nice kid. He was a good kid. He came in with his mom, and when we started talking or quote unquote hanging out, is he came in to pick up the original Gears of War. Gears of War had just come out, and he had it reserved. He's like, hey David, I'm gonna come in. Like, hey, I'm here to pick up my copy of Gears, and I was like, oh well, you're 16. You're not 17. You're not old enough to pick this up, so I can't sell you this game. And it probably would have been fine, but I didn't want to sell. It was just the policy, and I was like, well, you know what? How about if I just call your mom? Just call your mom on your cell phone, get her on the phone, and I'll ask her if it's okay. And if she says it's okay, then I've seen you enough. Like, I don't think I'm gonna lose my job over this. I've met your. So I called her up. I was like, hi, Mrs. Granger. Travis is here to pick up Gears, but it's like a mature game. Is that okay if I sell it to him? Because I have to ask. He needs parental permission. And she's like, oh yeah, sure, David, that's fine. That's fine. And so I sold it to him, and he was like, thanks a lot, David. I'm gonna go home. Do you want to play multiplayer tonight? And I was like, sure. And then we ended up playing Gears of War multiplayer, like some people from the store and him and some of his friends, and we ended up just playing online that night. And yeah, and then that's how I started getting in contact with him. I think maybe then on, every time he came in, it was like, oh, we're replaying games today, or I can't even remember how I got his cell phone number, but I still remember it. I mean, he's one of the few people whose cell phone number I have memorized. Like, I could just pick up a phone and dial it. I wouldn't need it saved. But yeah, that's how I met Travis. It's funny too because like a couple months ago I went to a baseball game, and somebody was like, and Travis came down to Houston to take me to the Astros game because they were playing the Rangers, and I had invited a different friend just to go along because we had an extra ticket, and my friend came along, and she was like, oh yeah, so how did you guys meet? How did you guys become friends? And like I basically just told her the story that I just told you guys, and she was like, David, you're really weird, huh? Because the thing is, I had met the girl had come to the baseball game. I had met her at Best Buy, and yeah, she was just working at Best Buy, and I always went to go pick up games. And every time I picked up a game, she was like, you're picking this up? You're picking that up? Oh, you picking up Mass Effect Andromeda? And I was like, yeah! And both of us were like, oh. But anyways, yeah, so like eventually after like months of, me picking up games and saying hi to her, I was just like, hey, do you want to be friends? Do you want, can I add you on Facebook? And she was like, yeah, but I have to tell you, I have a boyfriend. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. We can be friends and talk about video games. It doesn't have to evolve into a relationship. That's not the only purpose of making friends. But yeah, she's cool, and we've been friends ever since. And yeah. So yeah, that's how I met Travis. Now, how I met Nick is, yes, actually, Nick was through GameStop also, because I was working there, and he was just a kid that he would come in. He'd work at Office Depot, and on his breaks, he would come across the street and he would come to GameStop, and we're like, oh, I'm gonna look for games, and he was just a regular too. And with Nick, I remember the thing that like made me realize that he's somebody I would want to work for. I think he came in and he was dating some girl at the time. Like, he's always dating a girl, but he was dating his first relationship that I knew that he had, and he came in looking for a DS for her. And she was like, "Hey, I'm looking for a DS. I need to get one for my girlfriend." And I was like, "Oh yeah, well here's the used ones we have." And he was looking through them, and we just started talking about, and he was like, "Oh, I work at Office Depot and blah blah blah." And I was like, "Oh yeah, cool. I remember. Yeah, cool." And he doesn't know this because he always credits our boss. Our boss was named Troy. He always credits Troy. Because he always has very like, "Oh yeah, Troy's the one who hired me. Troy came to Office Depot and like kind of poached me away from Office Depot, because he saw something in me that that made me." And he always feels proud of this, and I don't think he knows this, but actually the day we were hiring for seasonal help, the day Troy went to Office Depot to go ask Nick to work at GameStop, Troy asked me first. He was like, "Hey, we're looking for somebody for seasonal help. Do you know anybody? Anybody you think that would be pretty good?" And I'm the one, Nick. You don't. Maybe I've never told this to Nick personally, but I'm telling you now on the official documentary. I'm the one. Troy asked me if there's anybody that would be good for the store, and I said, "Well, what about that kid that works at Office Depot? He's pretty into games, and he's got a good attitude. Like, what about him?" And he's like, "Oh yeah. Yeah, I remember him." And then he was like, "I'm gonna go take a break," and he literally got in his car and drove over to Office Depot mid shift to go ask Nick if he wanted to work at GameStop. But that's because I brought it up. Oh, I was about to take a sip of my drink. Shit. Okay, yeah. So that's how I met Nick. And Brad and I had already started a recording before. Like, we had started recording like regular podcast, and I remember the first show I recorded with Nick. I was like, "Hey," I had just moved into a new apartment. There was nothing there. It was just like a completely empty apartment. And I remember I was like, "Hey Nick, well, on your lunch break, why don't you just stop by and we'll just record something. We'll just record and see how it goes." And then I remember I put the recorder down, I hit record, and we're just like, "Yeah, so talk to me about games." And we just talked. And through talking to him, I was like, "Oh yeah, dude, this kid, like, he can talk about that's what you can feel it, man. You can feel it when you do podcasts, when you talk to people. Maybe that's like a talent I had, is you could feel who you had a good conversation with and who you didn't have a good conversation with." And Nick was one of those kids that, like, I was like, "Oh yeah, he talks about games. He's knowledgeable. He has an opinion. There's a back and forth you can have." And that's something I also had with like Travis. Is like, I remember what the first recording I had with Travis, I think I was like, "What are your favorite games of all time?" And he was like, "I like Myst and I like Luigi's Mansion." And I was like, right then and there, I was like, "Gotta have this kid. Gotta have this kid," because what fucking 18-year-old kid says, especially this was like 2000 and like, 4, 5, or 6. Like, what kid says Luigi's Mansion and Myst? Like, what kid, this is the Halo generation. This is the freaking GTA generation. And he says his favorite games are Myst and freaking Luigi's Mansion. And then that's when I was like, dude, Travis has to be there, because he's just such an oddball that, like an unknown quantity. That's what made him so great. Yeah, I really love that kid. Really, I mean, Travis and I have such a weird relationship, because I'm like so much more older than him, but for some reason we get along. It's like it's kind of like an older brother or like an older uncle. And I've told him before, I was like, I just want to go. There's a clip out there where I'm like, "Oh, I just want to go to Japan and take you to a hot spring and just go like hot spring together," because like he's the guy out of them that I feel like would actually go with me. Whereas like Nick and Brad are way too white, and they're like, "Oh, I could never take my clothes off in front of another man." Like Travis, I could see Travis, because Travis also played football when he was in high school, so he like had to deal with showers and that kind of stuff anyways. So he's a lot more like, okay, I'll get naked in front of you, whatever, you know. Yeah. So yeah, Travis, man, that's great. He and I have such a just an odd relationship. It's real funny. And yeah, it sounds bad on paper, man. It sounds bad when you're like, oh, he was a 16-year-old kid and you met him and then y'all started hanging out and you got his number. What are you fucking doing, David? What kind of pervert are you? But yeah. So Brad, I'll start off with Brad's part by saying that Brad and it's gonna sound weird, but I'll say that we're not really like best friends either. Like if you ask me, I'm like, oh yeah, he'd be my best friend. If I was getting married tomorrow, he'd be one of the people that I would have like as a best man or as a was it groomsman? Yeah, yeah, I definitely would. I probably have 5 people that I would consider, but as weird as it sounds, like Brad and I almost see him and I working together as like a relationship. Like for 5, 6, 7 years of my life, I was in a relationship with Brad, and the website was like our kid, and like no, like we would get in fights and stuff, but we would get over it because we got to stay together for the kids. We've got to everything we're doing is for the kids. That's kind of how I feel about Brad, and thank goodness he ended up meeting a girl and getting married so that I could get away from him. But that's kind of how I view it, is that we were in a relationship, we were living in the same house together, and it was every morning we'd wake up when we see each other, and then like we'd just talk about the show or talk about the site or talk about how we were going to make it better. And like I really don't know how to, because it's not just like a friendship, it wasn't just like a roommate situation. Like we were like living and working together, and like as weird as it sounds, like I appreciate that time in my life so much because I learned so many things from him. I know this video is going long and I'm kind of getting off topic, but I will tell this story. Maybe I'll make it in a different Brad's portion in a different. One of the greatest. I'm not gonna say the greatest, but one of the greatest lessons I learned from Brad is that I had a bad habit of hanging up on people when I was, when we started working together. I know exactly where it came from now, post fact, but at the time, like we get in a fight, we'd be talking about the site, and it was like, I would get upset. I was like, and then beep, just hang up on him, and then he would call back, and then I would see his number, and I'm like, fuck it, I'm not picking it up. And I just put the phone down, and then that's how our our interactions would go for a good for like probably 6 months or so. Like for the first 6 months we were working together, maybe even a year, maybe longer, I don't know. But I remember I would always hang up on him, and then finally, and then he'd call me back, and I wouldn't answer, and then eventually we'd talk about it down the line, and then he'd be like, and he was calling me out, but he wasn't calling me out in a way that's like, hey dude, fuck you, why you do that? He was like, very like, it was always about what's best for the website, and that's what I learned from him, and and bringing that into relationships too now. It's like he was like, why do you hang up on me? And I was like, I really didn't have anything to say. I was like, yeah, because you pissed me off, bro. And he was like, look, man, I just want you to know, like, everything I'm saying is not, like... Because coming from an Asian family, I feel like Asians tend to not take criticism in a right way. And this is something that I've learned from, like, working at GameStop and working with non-Asians, is that you have to, like, put your pride on the shelf and not take everything so damn personally. Like, I always used to take everything like as in a personal attack. So it's like when somebody said, oh, you didn't do a really good job here. I'm like, well, fuck you. Fuck you. If you don't want me to do it, then do it yourself. And like, that is something that's completely from my parents and from Asian family, is like that overreaction. And I'm so glad that I found a way to get out of it. Yeah. So Brad would be like, why'd you hang up on me? And I was like, oh, because fuck you, man. I wasn't happy. And he was like, dude, like, you have to understand, like, everything I'm talking to you, everything I say to you is in the positive, like, it's in the best, it's in a productive way. Anything I say negative is only because I want this website to be good is I want it to be better. So like, don't take it personally. And and like just everything is just helped me like build up on this instead of tearing it down. And that's something I learned completely from working with Brad, and it's one of the best lessons I learned in my life. Yeah, and I realized where there was a time when I realized where I got it from and why I was doing it, because I was back at home in Houston hanging out with my mom, and she was talking to my dad, and my dad said something that pissed her off, and then she just boop and hung up the phone. And then like of course my dad calls back, and she's like, I'm not picking it up. And I was like, oh my god, dude, like that's probably where I started picking it up from. And I was like, I saw her do it, and I was like, dude, I don't want to be like that. And this is not to hate on my mom or make y'all think that my mom is a bad person, but it was one of those things where I was like, I don't want to be like that. And so like I made an effort to be like, I'm really pissed off and I want to hang up right now, and like, from working with Brad, that's the lesson I learned, is not to do that, to not hang up with people. And I feel like I've brought it into my other relationships. Like the last person I dated, we constantly had discussions like, look, everything I'm saying, everything I'm doing is for the benefit of our relationship, is to make our relationship better. And please understand that. And so then, I mean, it's just, if you reiterate that and set that at the ground level every time you have a conversation, you just train yourself, you train your relationship to be, I'll look at things like that, is all in positivity, all in trying to build up. But yeah, so how did I meet Brad? So Brad and I went to the same middle school. We didn't go to the same high school. We went to the same middle school. And I remember very specifically, we were in art class together. We were in art class and we were drawing stuff. And I remember specifically, there was a time in art class that the police came in because we had to draw our hands. And everybody was like, okay, make a sign. And then you just draw your hand. And the police came in to try to like, because some people were in like throwing up gang signs or whatever, and they were throwing up gang signs and drawing them, and the police came in to kind of like, okay, well, these are gang signs, we need to talk to these students because that's inappropriate for school. And I remember specifically, Brad was one of the people who got called over, and I was like, Brad, because you knew Brad wasn't a gang member. It's just, he just accidentally picked a sign by accident that was wrong. It was so funny, and that's like, I think, the clearest memory I have of Brad in middle school, because we were like, I knew who he was, but we didn't hang in the same circles. The thing is, I didn't even know he liked games at all. And I think we went to the same high school, but he hung out with this guy I knew, and they roomed together, and we all went to UT. So I specifically remember, I've told this story so many times, so on the record, here's it for anybody who really wants to listen. So Brad was into Tekken. You probably heard about that. Every time Tekken comes up, he talks about it on the show and talks about it, how he loves Tekken and how he used to play all the time. And he did. He was always at the arcade. He was always playing Tekken, and he was always playing people. And I didn't know this, but at the time, I was into a game called Dance Dance Revolution, DDR, and I've talked about that. And so I would always go to the arcade to play DDR, and I would look over my shoulder, and there was Brad sitting his fat ass at the Tekken machine playing Tekken by himself, because there was nobody else playing at the time or whatever. He was waiting for people to come challenge him. So like, I would just keep running into him at the arcade, like, hey, you're here again? And he's like, you're here again? It was just one of those things. We keep running each other at the arcades, and then finally one day, I think he was like, "Hey, you should come try out Tekken, man. I'll teach you how to play Tekken." And I was like, "You should come try out DDR. Come teach you how to play DDR." And I think that's how we started talking. Is that he was like, "I'll teach you Tekken." I was like, "Okay, cool. I'm kind of interested in Tekken. I've always wanted to get into some sort of fighting game, and why not this one?" And so I think we met up a couple times to play Tekken, and like, again, my personality was completely different there. I was a lot more shy and like, okay, yeah, I rather learn by watching instead of like doing and making mistakes and looking dumb. But yeah, so so we started, doing that kind of stuff, and he was listening to video game podcasts, and he introduced me to the Hotspot, I think. And we would talk about, like, we would both listen, that we would end up both listening to the Hotspot every week. And after we listened to it, like, we'd have some sort of conversation about it. Like, oh, did you listen to the show yet? Okay, you did? Okay, so what'd you think about this? What'd you think about what he said there? And eventually, by doing that all the time, we were just like, hey, we should just, I mean, you play a lot of games, I play a lot of games. We should just, why don't we just record our own show? Like, you and I just, we'll just talk about games together, and we'll record together, and we'll talk about stuff. And he was like, yeah, okay, cool, let's do that. And it was one of those things where I think at the time he moved back to Houston. I think he graduated and moved back to Houston, and I was still in Austin. So we really couldn't meet that much. But I was coming home every other week or once a month. So I was like, well, whenever I come back, let's meet up and just hit record. And if you look at the first recording, our first recording was the Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess recording, because the Wii was coming out. Well, the game was supposed to come out on GameCube. The game got delayed because the Wii was coming out, and they were going to put it on the Wii, and they wanted to sell more Wii copies. So because of that, then the GameCube version got pushed back, and Brad was in a fit about it because he was unhappy that he was going to have to wait an extra 3 months to play a game that was originally supposed to come out for the GameCube. And so I bought a Wii, and I think I bought the Wii and I didn't even play Zelda. Like, I bought the Wii and I was playing like Red what was it called? Red Steel and Wii Sports, and I played all that stuff. And then it wasn't until months later when the GameCube... Oh, I told him I would wait till the GameCube version to play. I think that's what I told him. And so, like, the GameCube version played. We both played it. And then, like, the Wii came out in, like, November. And then in January or something, we sat down and we recorded the show. And that was the beginning of 4Player Podcast. Is that first Legend of Zelda, like, he played the GameCube version. I played the Wii version. And we just kind of compared notes. Like, for instance, I still remember the show, like, very clearly. There was some things he said. First of all, the games were reversed, and then on top of that too, there was like horse riding sequences that he said he liked a lot, and they were amazing. Like, the battles were great. I've still never played the GameCube version, actually. That's funny, but also, like, the charging of the sword, like you didn't do that on the Wii. You would just wiggle the remote, and he would just spin around. Whereas in the GameCube version, you actually had to hold it down and charge it up. And then he said, like, I remember he said the light would go to the tip of the sword to let you know that it was fully charged. Yeah, I mean, I remember that show pretty clearly. Maybe because I've also listened to it a couple times since then. But yeah, I think the show's still pretty listenable. I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. But maybe I'll go listen to that after this recording. But yeah, that's the first part of the 4PP documentary. Like, how I met all of them and how I knew them. Yeah, so thanks for listening. I think the next part would probably be how we actually ended up doing a show and ended up broadcasting video games, because we started off with a completely different mindset. Thanks for listening. We'll see you later. Bye.